I want you to consider a specific scenario for a moment, not a hypothetical, an operational reality that is being discussed right now in the planning rooms of the US Navy's Fifth Fleet, in the corridors of CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa, Florida, and in the intelligence assessments that cross the desks of senior officials in Washington on a weekly basis. The scenario is this: somewhere beneath the surface of the Red Sea, in water that is between 200 and 2,200 meters deep, depending on location, in a body of water that carries approximately 12 to 15% of global trade, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, there are threats that the most technologically sophisticated naval force in human history cannot reliably find, cannot reliably track, and cannot reliably neutralize before they become operational. This is not a claim made by Iranian state media. This is not a piece of strategic information warfare designed to create psychological pressure. This is the operational assessment of Western naval analysts, defense technology researchers, and the declassified summaries of American intelligence assessments. And the reason it is not being stated clearly in the mainstream coverage is that acknowledging it creates a political problem for every government in the Western alliance structure that has publicly committed to keeping the Red Sea open for commercial navigation. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what the threat beneath the surface of the Red Sea actually consists of, why the American naval response has been structurally insufficient, not for want of effort or resources, but because of the specific nature of what it is being asked to counter, and why the implications of this extend far beyond the Red Sea itself to the broader question of whether American conventional naval power can continue to serve as the guarantor of global commercial maritime order in the 21st century. This is the analysis. Subscribe if you have not already, because the picture we are assembling here requires depth that the daily news cycle cannot accommodate. Let us start with the geography and the strategic logic, because they are inseparable in this case. The Red Sea is a long, narrow body of water, approximately 1,930 kilometers in length and between 280 and 360 kilometers wide. At its southern end, it narrows dramatically into the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a choke point approximately 29 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, through which, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, approximately 6.2 million barrels of oil pass daily, along with an enormous volume of containerized cargo connecting European and Asian markets. To the north, the Red Sea branches into the Gulf of Suez, the approach to the Suez Canal, through which approximately 12 to 15% of global trade transits annually. In other words, the Red Sea is not a peripheral body of water, it is the central arterial channel of the global trading system, and the forces operating against commercial navigation in the Red Sea have understood this with considerable clarity. Now, the public conversation about the Red Sea threat has been almost entirely focused on the Houthi missile and drone campaign, the surface and aerial strikes against commercial vessels that Operation Prosperity Guardian, the American-led naval coalition, was assembled to counter. That conversation is not wrong. Those strikes have occurred. They have caused significant disruption. Multiple vessels have been damaged or sunk. Insurance costs for Red Sea transit have increased by between 200 and 400%, according to Lloyd's of London market data published in the Financial Times. But the surface and aerial threat is the part of the picture that is visible, and the most significant strategic development in the Red Sea over the past 18 months is not visible. It is beneath the surface, and this is where the analysis goes in a direction that most mainstream coverage has not followed. Subscribe if you are watching this and beginning to understand why the official description of what is happening in the Red Sea is so radically incomplete. Announcement number 1, the underwater threat infrastructure. And I want to be precise here, because precision is what distinguishes this analysis from speculation. The Houthi movement, which we need to stop describing as a simple Yemeni militia and start describing as what it has become, which is an Iranian-equipped, Iranian-trained, and in several critical technical dimensions, Iranian-directed maritime denial force, has received from Iran a transfer of underwater warfare capability that has not been fully acknowledged in public Western assessments. This capability has 3 components. The first is the Shahed-class naval drone, an underwater unmanned vehicle derived from Iranian technology that was publicly showcased at the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy's 2023 technological exhibition and subsequently reported on by the U.S. Naval Institute. These vehicles operate at depths sufficient to avoid surface detection, can be pre-positioned and remotely activated, and are designed to close on vessel hulls in a terminal attack profile that conventional naval mine countermeasures are not optimized to counter. The second component is a magnetic influence mine system that Iran has transferred to Houthi operators in sufficient quantities, according to analysis by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, to constitute a persistent rather than episodic threat to Red Sea navigation. Unlike the more sophisticated intelligent mine systems in Iran's own inventory, these transferred systems are simpler, and their simplicity makes them in some ways harder to counter because they do not require the kind of sophisticated command and control infrastructure that can be disrupted or spoofed. The third component is the most recent and least discussed. According to reporting by the Times of London and subsequently cross-referenced by the War Zone, the defense analysis publication that has done more rigorous tracking of Houthi naval capability than almost any other Western source, there is credible evidence of the transfer of small submarine technology to Houthi-aligned operators, not fleet submarines, not the sophisticated Ghadir-class platforms that Iran operates, midget submarines, small, human-operated or remotely operated vessels designed for shallow water operations, coastal denial, and covert mine-laying. If this transfer has occurred at the scale the reporting suggests, it represents a qualitative escalation in the Red Sea threat that the current American naval deployment is not configured to counter. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2. The structural inadequacy of the American counter-response. And this is the part that requires the most careful thinking, because the inadequacy is not a matter of American incompetence or insufficient commitment. It is structural. It is built into the nature of the force that was assembled, and it reflects a deeper truth about the limits of conventional naval power in asymmetric maritime environments. Operation Prosperity Guardian was assembled with considerable speed and considerable political will in late 2023. It involves U.S. Navy destroyers and cruisers, British Royal Navy frigates, assets from France, Italy, the Netherlands, and several other coalition partners. It has conducted thousands of interceptions of Houthi drones and missiles. It has achieved significant tactical success in its primary mission of reducing the effectiveness of the surface and aerial strike campaign. But here is the structural problem. The vessels that make up Operation Prosperity Guardian are optimized for what naval doctrine calls blue water operations, deep ocean environments where their radar, sonar, and fire control systems operate in conditions close to their design parameters. The Red Sea is not a blue water environment in the operationally relevant sense. It is a shallow, constrained, acoustically complex body of water, particularly in its southern approaches and in the waters adjacent to the Yemeni coastline. According to analysis published by the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, American anti-submarine warfare doctrine has been focused primarily on the North Atlantic and Western Pacific threat environments, the Soviet submarine threat and now the Chinese submarine threat. Decades, the specific acoustic, thermal, and geographic characteristics of the Red Sea are different from both of those environments in ways that matter operationally. Stay with me, because this is where the picture becomes genuinely alarming for anyone thinking seriously about what the sustained Red Sea disruption means for the global economy. The U.S. Navy's stock of SM-2 and SM-6 missiles, the primary interceptors used by destroyers against Houthi aerial threats, has been depleted at a rate that the Congressional Budget Office, in a report cited by Defense News in early 2025, described as exceeding the replacement production rate. In plain language, American destroyers are firing expensive missiles faster than the industrial base can produce them. The Raytheon production facilities that manufacture these systems are running at capacity. The unit cost of an SM-6 missile is approximately $4 million. The Houthi drone that it intercepts costs, according to U.S. defense official estimates cited in the Wall Street Journal, between $2,000 and $20,000. That economic asymmetry, $4 million to destroy something that costs at most $20,000, is not a tactical problem. It is a strategic one, and it is precisely the strategic calculation that Iranian planners designed it to be. Announcement number 3. What this means for the global economic architecture. And this is the announcement that almost nobody is connecting to the Red Sea story in the way it needs to be connected. The disruption to Red Sea commercial navigation that has occurred since late 2023 has already produced measurable economic effects that go well beyond the shipping industry. According to the IMF's April 2025 World Economic Outlook, the rerouting of container traffic around the Cape of Good Hope, adding between 10 and 14 days to transit times, has contributed to supply chain delays, elevated freight costs, and inflationary pressure in European and Asian consumer markets. The Kiel Institute for the World Economy estimated that in early 2024, container shipping costs on the Asia-Europe route had increased by 250% compared to pre-disruption levels. Those costs do not stay in shipping. They migrate. They appear in the price of electronics, clothing, machinery, food, and medical equipment. They appear in the quarterly earnings reports of retail companies that depend on Asian manufacturing. They appear in the inflation statistics that central banks respond to with interest rate decisions that affect mortgage payments, business borrowing costs, and employment levels. The Red Sea disruption is not a shipping story. It is an inflation story. It is a cost of living story. And the people who designed it understand exactly what economic transmission channels it activates. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the diplomatic language, because there are two conversations occurring simultaneously, and the mainstream media is attending only to the more visible one. The visible conversation is the one about targeting, about American strikes on Houthi infrastructure, about precision strikes against missile storage facilities and launch sites and command nodes. This conversation is real, the strikes are real, and the tactical results are genuinely mixed. The Houthis have demonstrated an ability to absorb significant kinetic pressure on their infrastructure and maintain operational tempo. A resilience that the Biden administration found uncomfortable and that the Trump administration has struggled to explain away. The less visible conversation is the one happening in shipping company boardrooms, in insurance market committees, and in the offices of the major container carriers, Maersk, MSC, Hapag-Lloyd, that have collectively decided to maintain their Red Sea avoidance policies despite the American military presence. Because here is the truth, that the official narrative can't comfortably accommodate. The commercial shipping industry has made a collective judgment that the American naval presence in the Red Sea is insufficient to guarantee the safety of their vessels and their crews. That judgment is expressed in insurance premium pricing and routing decisions, not in press releases, but it is unambiguous. When Lloyd's of London prices Red Sea transit at a 400% premium above standard maritime rates, that is not a political statement. That is the most honest, institutional assessment of actual risk available. And that assessment says the American naval presence is not solving the problem. The French government, whose shipping interests are significant, issued a quiet, diplomatic communication to American counterparts in early 2025, reported by Le Monde and subsequently picked up by Politico, suggesting that the current operational framework for Red Sea security was inadequate to the threat and requesting a strategic review of allied burden-sharing arrangements. The French position was that the threat had evolved beyond what the current coalition configuration could address. Washington described the French communication as routine allied consultation. That is the diplomatic language for, we heard you, we disagree, and we do not intend to change our approach. The historical parallel here is the one that I think carries the most instructive weight. Not Thermopylae, though the choke point geography applies. Not the Peloponnesian War, though the economic attrition logic applies. The parallel I want to draw is the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. From 1979 to 1989, the Soviet Union committed approximately 100,000 troops, enormous material resources, and significant political capital to the project of stabilizing Afghanistan against an insurgent force that it vastly outmatched in conventional military terms. The insurgent force, armed, trained, and equipped with outside support, was not trying to defeat the Soviet military. It was trying to make the cost of maintaining the Soviet military's presence unsustainable, and it succeeded. Not because it won a decisive battle, because it made every week of continued commitment more expensive than the week before, until the political will to continue collapsed under the accumulated weight of that cost. The force operating against commercial navigation in the Red Sea is not trying to defeat the US Navy. No serious analyst believes that is achievable, or that anyone is attempting it. The force is trying to make the cost of maintaining American naval guarantees of maritime security, in missiles, in hull wear, in crew tempo, in industrial base strain, in political capital, high enough that the sustainability of those guarantees comes into question. And the evidence that this strategy is producing results is visible in every shipping company's routing decision, every insurance market's premium schedule, and every congressional hearing where the question of SM6 production rates is raised. So where does this leave us? Three paths, and I want to be honest about the uncertainty attached to each. Path 1, technological breakthrough. The American defense industry develops and deploys at sufficient scale a counter-UUV capability, an underwater unmanned vehicle hunting system, a deployed mine countermeasures platform that effectively neutralizes the underwater component of the Red Sea threat. This restores commercial confidence in Red Sea transit, insurance premiums normalize, and the strategic calculus shifts. I assess this path at 15% probability within a 2-year time frame. The technology exists in developmental form. The deployment and industrial scaling are the constraints. Path 2, negotiated arrangement. A regional diplomatic framework, possibly mediated by Oman, which has played this role effectively before, or by China, which has both the relationships and the incentive to reduce Red Sea disruption, given its enormous stake in the Asia-Europe trade route, produces an implicit or explicit arrangement that reduces healthy operational tempo in exchange for a political process that addresses the underlying conflict. I assess this path at 35% probability. It requires political will on multiple sides that is fragile but not absent. Path 3, sustained attrition. The current situation persists. American naval assets rotate through the Red Sea, absorbing costs in munitions and tempo. Commercial traffic maintains its Cape of Good Hope routing. The global economy absorbs the elevated freight cost as a structural feature rather than a temporary disruption. Iranian-aligned forces continue operating below the threshold of response that would trigger a decisive military action, and the United States continues publicly describing this situation as manageable, while privately reassessing the limits of conventional naval deterrence in asymmetric maritime environments. I assess this path at 50% probability. It is also, in the long run, the path that does the most damage to the credibility of American naval guarantees globally. The question I want you to take from this analysis is the one that I think matters most for the next 5 years of global strategic order. If the American naval guarantee of maritime security, the guarantee that has underpinned global commercial architecture since 1945, is being eroded in the Red Sea by a combination of underwater threats, economic asymmetry, and the structural limits of conventional naval power in constrained littoral environments, what replaces it? What institution, what coalition, what alternative framework steps into the space that American naval supremacy currently occupies? Tell me in the comments what you think the answer to that question is. Tell me what element of the underwater threat picture was new information for you today. We will keep tracking every development in the Red Sea, every insurance market movement, every routing decision, every capability transfer. That is the level of analysis this channel provides. Subscribe now. Share this with anyone in your network who is paying attention to global supply chains, energy markets, or the question of how power is actually distributed in the world right now versus how it is officially described. Turn on notifications. The next analysis in this series is coming, and it goes deeper into the capability transfer question than anything we have covered today. I want to spend a few more minutes on the dimension of this problem that rarely gets adequate attention in the mainstream coverage, because it is the dimension that ultimately determines whether the Red Sea security situation resolves or whether it becomes a permanent feature of the global economic landscape. That dimension is the political economy of coalition maintenance, and it is where the American strategic position is most fragile in ways that the military operational picture does not capture. Operation Prosperity Guardian was launched with a coalition of 38 nations. In the months since its launch, the active participation of those nations has varied enormously. The United States and the United Kingdom have carried the overwhelming majority of the kinetic burden, the actual interception missions, the strikes against Houthi infrastructure, the convoy escort operations. Most of the other coalition members have either withdrawn their active contributions, limited their participation to intelligence sharing and logistical support, or declined to acknowledge their participation publicly due to domestic political pressures. France, whose naval interests in the Red Sea are significant, declined to join Operation Prosperity Guardian and instead participated in EU Operation Aspides, a separate, explicitly defensive, non-kinetic capable naval mission that was precisely calibrated to allow European nations to demonstrate commitment to maritime security without direct participation in American-led offensive operations against Yemeni territory. The symbolic and practical significance of that distinction is enormous, and it is a distinction that the official framing of American-led coalition unity consistently papers over. Italy, Spain, and Belgium made similar choices. Greece joined Aspides while maintaining commercial shipping connections with regional partners that would have been complicated by full Prosperity Guardian participation. The pattern across European coalition partners is one of interest in the maritime security outcome, combined with reluctance to bear the political and military costs of the approach the United States has chosen to pursue that outcome. According to reporting by Politico Europe, citing anonymous European diplomatic sources, the internal conversation among European partners about Operation Prosperity Guardian by mid-2024 had shifted from how do we contribute more to how do we manage our relationship with Washington while the American approach runs its course. That is a significant shift in the political texture of coalition cohesion, even if the official statements continue to emphasize allied unity. Now, why does this matter for the operational picture? Because the effectiveness of any naval security operation in the Red Sea depends on the sustained commitment of coalition partners to bear costs over a time horizon that extends beyond the current news cycle. If European partners are privately limiting their commitment based on an assessment that the current American approach is unsustainable, that private assessment eventually becomes public behavior, reduced participation, diplomatic distancing, and eventually the kind of coalition fracture that removes the multilateral legitimacy from what becomes a unilateral American operation. And a unilateral American operation in the Red Sea, without the NATO and Gulf state partnership that currently provides the political architecture for military action, is a substantially less sustainable proposition, both militarily and politically. I want to be careful here not to overstate the degree to which this coalition fracture has already occurred. It has not. The formal coalition architecture remains intact. American diplomatic management of allied relationships is sophisticated and has prevented the private skepticism from becoming public rupture. But the trajectory is visible to anyone paying close attention to the diplomatic signals, and the trajectory is not toward greater allied cohesion. Let me close with the observation that I think is most important for understanding how the Red Sea situation resolves over the medium term. The solution to the Red Sea security problem is not primarily a military one. The military dimension is necessary. Maintaining a naval presence that prevents the complete collapse of commercial confidence in the sea lane is essential. But the solution is political. It requires addressing the conflict that created the political conditions for Houthi maritime operations in the first place. It requires a Yemen political process that reduces the motivation and the external support for continued maritime disruption, and it requires a broader regional security arrangement that addresses Iranian strategic interests in a way that reduces Iran's incentive to maintain the Houthi maritime capability as an active strategic instrument. None of these requirements are easily satisfied. All of them are within the realm of what is theoretically achievable through sustained, patient, sophisticated diplomacy. And none of them are being systematically pursued in the current American policy framework, which remains oriented toward military operations and economic pressure rather than political resolution. The Red Sea will remain an elevated risk environment until that changes. The global economy will continue to absorb the cost of that elevated risk. And the people making decisions in Tehran, in Sana'a, and in Beijing will continue to note with considerable satisfaction that the world's most powerful navy is consuming enormous resources to manage a security problem that a political solution could address at a fraction of the cost. That is the analysis. We will keep tracking the Red Sea situation at every level: operational, diplomatic, economic, and strategic. Subscribe, share this with anyone who is following global trade and supply chain questions, and we will see you in the next analysis.